3 different convictions of one man, and yet this case is still unsolved. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Holly Staker. Viewer discretion is advised. Real quick before we get started, hello, my name is Mike. I tell true crime stories here on YouTube, obviously. I tell thrice of them a week on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. So please subscribe if you're into that kind of thing. You're a bunch of cuckoo wackadoos like the rest of us. Also, I tell short form true crime stories over on TikTok. I have 2 pages where I'm currently telling stories, just in case TikTok bans one of my accounts, which is normal. The links to those TikToks are in the link tree in the description of this video below. They will also pop up here at some point in the beginning and also at the end. Also in the link tree, you will find my merch store where we sell t-shirts and hoodies, shirts like this. This says like Crimer or Crew member, whatever, and other shirts and sweaters. So if you want to check that out, feel free. It's in the link tree below. We do ship all over the world. And then lastly, if there is a case you want me to cover, just go ahead and email me, which is also listed below. Just email me the name of the individual or the case, where it happened, when it happened. I'll add it to the list. I have like 5,800 names on that list. I pick my cases at random, so it may be a while before I get to that one, but I will get to it eventually. But let's get into today's case. Holly Staker was born on January 13th, 1981. I honestly don't have any information on Holly Staker. All I really know is at the time of this case, she was 11 years old and she was living in Chicago, Illinois. Holly, at age 11, was already into babysitting, and she would do babysitting, jobs from time to time. And so that's exactly what she was doing on the evening of August 17th, 1992. She was babysitting 2 children whose house was located on Hickory Street, and this is in Waukegan, Illinois. That evening, when the child's mom came home, she noticed that their back door of their house had been forcefully opened. Like someone had either kicked it open or pried it open. And at first, the mom didn't see any sign of Holly. But just a few moments later, a horrific discovery was made. In the children's bedroom, 11-year-old Holly Staker was on the ground, covered in blood. And sadly, she was deceased. The 2 children were left unharmed physically. I can't speak for them in terms of their mental state, but they were not injured in any way. The coroner would determine that Holly Staker, this tiny 11-year-old child, had been stabbed 27 times. 27. What kind of person stabs any child or anyone, but 27 times to this little 11-year-old girl? That new level of evil. But that wasn't it. This person also attempted to strangle her, and she was also sexually assaulted. The Waukegan police started their investigation right away. They would obviously question the owners of the house. They would question Holly's family. They couldn't think of anyone who would have done this. It really appeared to be that this was just a random thing, that this person randomly broke into this random house and decided to sexually assault and murder an 11-year-old child. 10 weeks into this investigation, police are given a tip from a jailhouse informant. As we all know, those always go well. This informant pointed the finger at a 19-year-old named Juan Rivera. Juan Rivera, who did not know Holly Staker or her family. Juan Rivera did not know the residences of the house that she was babysitting at. And none of them knew him or knew of him. At the time that Holly was murdered, Juan Rivera was, I guess, on some kind of house arrest. He was being monitored electronically because he had been convicted of burglary charges. Like I said, he was wearing an ankle monitor, and they were able to discern that he was at his home the night of the murder. They also have evidence that he was on the phone to someone who was in a different country for a very long portion of that night. And so they were able to determine he was at, likely he should have, that would have indicated he was at his house. Yet, despite this physical evidence proof that he was elsewhere, they still brought him in for questioning because according to this inmate who was with him in a jail cell at one point. Juan had talked about this murder and given details that no one should have known about, I guess. So they bring him in for questioning. Not just for a couple of hours, not just for a day, for 4 days. They interrogate this guy. 4 days. He continually denied having anything to do with this murder. He said he did not do it. He was not there. You have proof that this ankle monitor, you knew where I was. I didn't do this. They continued to just sort of beat on him emotionally for this entire 4 days. He was malnourished. He wasn't drinking a lot of water. And then after 4 days, after just being completely mentally exhausted, and after they kept being, the police are basically saying, you did this, we know you did this, just confess, you did this. After they did that for so long, he finally just broke down and he confessed. But their version of a confession was they had asked him something along, about, did you do this? And apparently what he did was he went like this, kind of went like that, like he nodded. That was it for them. That was the confession. He did it. So one investigator goes and types up a big old long confession. Once they're done, they give it to Juan Rivera. Sign this. This is the confession that you've apparently given by nodding your head. While they're typing the letter, by the way, Juan Rivera is in his jail cell and he is observed literally smashing his head against the wall of his cell repeatedly. This was a clear and obvious breakdown. He had been mentally destroyed by these cops. They didn't care. They just get here, just sign the paper, whatever, who cares about your head, just sign this paper. The police claimed that all of this confession that was typed up was word for word what Juan Rivera said. It wasn't. But then I guess he does give some sort of general synopsis of this murder they're saying he committed. And they kind of add that to this confession that they typed up. Well, the issue with that is that a lot of the information he was giving about this murder and sexual assault, the information he provided was incorrect. It wasn't accurate at all. Almost as if he wasn't there and he was just making it up to police to get them to stop doing this to him. So the state's attorney saw this confession, saw all of the wrongness of it. And so this lawyer gave the confession back to police and said, go back to him, get him to confess again. And this time we need the correct information. So they go back to him and they essentially what it sounds like is they just kind of told him what he needed to confess to, and he did. And then it just sort of, now it was plausible. Now it was real. Okay, now we know he did this because now he's getting the right information. Probably because police were feeding him the information. In November of 1993, Juan Rivera goes on trial for the murder of Holly Staker. The evidence they use is the second signed confession he gave, the one that just sounded right, However, he willingly, before he even confessed, he willingly gave them his fingerprints, his DNA, hair, everything. There was none of his DNA at the crime scene. There was none of his fingerprints at the crime scene. There was no hair of his found. After a very quick trial, a couple of weeks, on November 19th, 1993, Juan Rivera, based on solely that second confession, with no physical evidence, with no witnesses testifying, with nothing, he's convicted by a jury. Yep, you did it. Clearly. You confessed, so you did it. 3 years later, in 1996, the state appellate court overturns his conviction based on the fact that, there was a lot of errors here. There was a lot of issues with this investigation, with the interrogation, with the trial. It was all a mess. So we're reversing it. Now do it again. In September of 1998, Juan Rivera goes on trial for the second time. Once again, the only thing they really had was this second confession he gave to police. And that is their strongest evidence. They, again, in the second trial, did not have any DNA, hair, fingerprints, any physical evidence whatsoever, shoe impressions, anything connecting him to this murder. This time, they now had a witness, Taylor Engelbrecht, who was one of the two children who was being babysat at the time. When the murder occurred, Taylor was 2 years old. Stating that, I saw someone who looked like Juan Rivera in the house. Must have been him. Oh, okay. And so he was once again convicted by the jury, and again he was sentenced to life in prison without parole. The same sentence he got after the first trial. He appeals, and in 2001, this time the appellate court says, nope, sorry, you're still convicted. And then, on May 24th, 2003, they would allow for DNA testing to be done How nice of them. Because there was DNA left behind inside of Holly because, again, she was sexually assaulted. That DNA, they tested it against Juan Rivera. Guess what? Was not a match at all. Meaning, he did not sexually assault her. They never once said that there could have been two people involved. I don't think the kid said there were two people there. I'm not really sure exactly what they saw. So if it was just one person, it wasn't Juan. He didn't do it because it's not his DNA at all. And then it took 3 years after this, 3 years, in 2006 for a judge to vacate the conviction for a second time. But they don't say, that's it, we're done. Nope. The prosecution decides we're still going to go after him. Despite the DNA, despite the really shitty confession, and the fact that there's no other physical evidence, yeah, we're going to do this again. Absolutely. Yeah. In 2009, a third trial begins. I shit you not. The prosecution in this case says, well, the DNA doesn't exclude him from being involved, even though we've never presented that there may have been a second person involved. We've only ever said it was just one guy, but I guess now maybe there was two. And they actually said this. Holly Staker was 11 years old and she was probably sexually active, and so she probably had consensual sex with someone else, and that's why the DNA is there. Fucking what? They said the DNA inside, this 11-year-old child, that's probably not even her killer. Probably just another person. So that's it. Great. Then what else do you have? This confession? This jury could give the Casey Anthony jury a run for their money because they once again still found Juan Rivera guilty of the murder, despite being given evidence that he was not, that wasn't him. Yeah, he probably was still there, did it. And then, like another year or two goes by. The witness from the second trial, the child who said they could place Juan Rivera there, basically that witness and the mother would come forward to state that they were pressured by police to say what they said. They weren't necessarily coached or told by force to say these things, but the mom of the child, they said that they felt a ton of pressure being put on them to just ID Juan Rivera as the guy. And they recanted their statements from the second trial. They said, we didn't actually, Taylor said, I didn't actually see him. I just thought I was supposed to say that. For fuck's sakes. His post-conviction attorneys found out that he wasn't even allowed to present a defense, basically. Look into, for this third trial, let's look into who this DNA was, because that's clearly another suspect. But they're like, no, that's obviously, like we said, she was sexually active at 11, with no proof of that whatsoever, by the way. No one ever said that she was. He still wasn't allowed to provide a proper defense. With all of this, in December of 2011, the Illinois Appellate Court, again, they've done this a few times now with this case. This time they said that his conviction was unjustified and cannot stand. The confession clearly appeared to be almost forced, or, he had a lower IQ, as typically is the case with stories like this, that he didn't know what he was doing. He had been browbeaten for 4 days with minimal food and water, and he had no idea what he was doing. And you have the DNA excluding him completely. So they finally said, okay, now we're overturning this conviction completely. We're vacating the conviction. And now the prosecution in 2011 said, well, I guess third time wasn't the charm, and so we're just going to stop this. After Juan Rivera spent 20 years in a prison cell, the prosecution said, well, I guess we'll just drop the charges down. Yeah. Juan Rivera was then released from prison officially. All charges against him were dropped. He was actually given a certificate of innocence by the courts, basically not just saying he's not guilty because of reasonable doubt. They're saying he's not guilty. He's innocent. He didn't do this. They also awarded him $200,000+ at the time. But he ain't done. He sues them. He sues the Lake County law enforcement agency as a whole because of this wrongful conviction of their horrible interrogation skills, their just everything. And they settle out of court. He is awarded $20 million. Good for him. Then, in 2014, there is a breakthrough. They were running DNA in Illinois from another case. So back in 2000, a man named Delwyn Foxworth was at his home when apparently 3 men broke into his home and robbed him. And I guess they tortured Delwyn Foxworth. They caused him some pretty significant harm, which he didn't die that night, but he ended up dying 2 years later from the injuries he sustained from this attack. There was one suspect who was arrested for this and charged with his murder. His name was Marvin Williford. So he was convicted of the now murder of Delwyn, and he is sentenced to 80 years in prison. So the murder weapon was a piece of wood, a 2x4. Fast forwarding now to like 2014, his attorneys are basically trying to fight to get DNA tested on that piece of wood. And they win. They win that right to do that, which is insane that you even have to like fight in court to get DNA tested, for God's sakes. Shouldn't you want to know for sure? Test the DNA. Why put up a fight? Sorry, I get animated about it. So they test the piece of wood. Lo and behold, they do find DNA on that piece of wood, which means that the DNA on that piece of wood is the person who was holding it, who struck Delwyn and eventually which led to his death. That DNA did not match Marvin Williford. It was not his DNA on that piece of wood. They knew at that point that he was not the one to strike Delwyn over the head. However, in 2014, when they run that DNA into their overall database, they get a match to another case. It matches DNA found at a crime scene in Illinois back in 1992. The DNA, specifically, the Holly Staker case. The person who sexually assaulted Holly Staker, that person, his DNA found inside her body was the same DNA left behind on that piece of wood that was used to kill someone else about 8 years later. The DNA was 100% not Marvin's, and it was also not Jose Rivera's, making it even more clear that this was not a case of an 11-year-old girl who was sexually active. It was clearly the person who sexually assaulted Holly Staker was an adult male who was a psychopath, and he killed her. And then he killed someone 8 years later. He may have killed more than that. However, in Marvin Williford's case, he is still in prison. He is still fighting for his case to be looked at. He is still fighting for potentially having his conviction overturned. But in his case, there were, from what I understand, 3 people involved. I don't think they've captured all 3 of them. Obviously, they haven't, because they would have the DNA if they did. Marvin Williford is saying he was innocent, and from what I understand, he's saying he wasn't even there. So he isn't like naming any other people in terms of, let's find this person, get their DNA, and see if it matches. But now we have a serial killer, essentially. I mean, it's 2 murders that the FBI would call that a serial killer. But who is it? It's not Juan Rivera. It's not Marvin Williford. But there is one person who is connected to both of those cases. That person is still out there, unknown to the world. And this is probably the type of person who likes to brag and talk about what they've done. They've probably been in a jail cell at some point in their lives, and maybe they've told an inmate. Now, snitches in jails are not always reliable. As a matter of fact, most of the time they're not reliable. So I think the police would need someone or something stronger than that. Whoever did it, both crimes, has not ever had to put their DNA into the police system. So does that mean they've just committed a bunch of crimes that have never been caught? Or did they go to jail but never got their DNA collected? There's one other piece of evidence that Juan Rivera's attorneys would present much, much later on, like after the conviction. So I guess there was a pair of shoes found in Juan Rivera's home that they're claiming they found in Juan Rivera's home that had some tiny blood drops on it, and those blood drops matched Holly Staker. But what his lawyer is saying is after they've researched it, the shoes they said they found in Juan's home during the initial part of the investigation, which they never presented those shoes down the road. So they didn't actually know about the shoe evidence until like one of the later trials. Those shoes weren't even manufactured during the time that Holly was killed. Those shoes were first made years after she was killed. And so it showed that the police may have actually planted evidence after the fact. They may have planted evidence a couple of years later. But at any rate, at this point, the murder of Holly Staker is unsolved. They have the person's profile. They have that person's DNA. They technically know who did it. They just don't know the name. But somebody somewhere out there has got to know the truth, and perhaps that someone is you. If you have any information about the murder of Holly Staker, please contact the Lake County Crime Stoppers at 1-847-662-2222. Or if you dare attempt it, because you know how shady they were in this, you can also contact the Waukegan Police Department. Their number is 847-599-2608. You can report your information anonymously. You don't have to say who you are. You just have to say what you know. So please, if you have anything, this was an 11-year-old girl whose life was ended brutally in front of 2 other children who I hope were asleep and didn't actually witness this. But she deserves answers. Her family deserves answers. They deserve closure. So please help Holly Staker and her family get the justice she rightfully deserves. But that is it for this case. True crime, a Rooney Dooney Dingleberry Dongs. I hope you found it interesting. As usual, please subscribe, give the video a like so more people can see it, because you never know, the right person, that one right person might see it and have information. Also follow my TikTok page. It's linked wherever. Check out the merch store. We ship all over the world. Recommend a case to my email, which is listed below. And yeah, that was weird. Why don't I stop it? Okay. Let's end this video with some Chuck Norris jokes. I don't know why, that was just a random thought that popped in my head. We'll find out if this is the proper way to say goodbye. Time waits for no man, unless that man is Chuck Norris. If you spell Chuck Norris in Scrabble, you win forever. In the beginning, there was nothing. But then, Chuck Norris came along and roundhouse kicked nothing. And he told it to get a job. When God said, "Let there be light," Chuck Norris said, "Say please." The dinosaurs once gave Chuck Norris a weird look. And well, we all know what happened to them. Chuck Norris's tears can cure cancer. The problem? Chuck Norris doesn't cry. Chuck Norris does not sleep. He only waits. Chuck Norris once shot a plane down by pointing his finger and saying, "Bang." Some people can pee their names into snow. Chuck Norris can pee his name into concrete. Chuck Norris can stand faster than anyone can run. Chuck Norris once won a game of Connect 4 in just 3 moves. Chuck Norris can slam a revolving door. Chuck Norris can play the piano with a violin. The dark is afraid of Chuck Norris. Stupid. So stupid. Chuck Norris once killed 2 stones with 1 bird. Chuck Norris makes onions cry. Okay, that's it. I have the mentality of a 9-year-old. Okay, so catch you later. If Chuck Norris allows it. If he allows it. He doesn't allow it.